And they don't want us to relate to this worldwide movement because they feel that we might become a little bit more confident about our ability to win, and we might be a little bit bolder, and we might start doing more things that would challenge the power of the monopolies here. But things are going to change.
That, my friends, was the voice of Angela Davis, political activist, civil rights activist, freedom fighter, radical. She's been given lots of names. And that was an audio clip from an interview with her speaking at the Malcolm X College in Chicago way back in 1972. And I thought that would be a really nice way to set up today's episode because it's all about change. We're going to start with really low level, actually, change without the gravitas of that voice. We've got some exciting changes to the podcast, switching things up a little bit. We're going to hear more about that later towards the end. What else are we doing today? We are catching up with some of our earlier guests, each of them change makers in their own rights, in their areas of expertise. We're going to be hearing about the latest developments on their campaigns, their work, their thinking, their mindsets. But I want to kick off with what I think is an extraordinary wind of change, the likes of which I honestly can't recall in my lifetime. Correct me if I'm wrong. Genuinely would love to know if I'm missing something. So I'm talking about the university student protests and encampments that began in the US, organized by Columbia University Apartheid Divest, a student-led coalition of more than 100 organizations, including Jewish Voice for Peace. Obviously, I'm reading that from their website. And they gathered really to protest what they describe as the university's continued financial investment in corporations that profit from Israeli genocide and apartheid. And that's according to their news release. Well, what they've done is gone and triggered a truly global and growing chain reaction of student activism, with new encampments being set up every day in countries around the world, from Spain, the University of Valencia, in New Delhi at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, the Free University of Berlin in Amsterdam, Sciences Po Lille in France, in Seoul, in Beirut, in Sydney, and here in the UK, there's one popping up almost daily at the moment, adding to the list of Edinburgh, Coventry, Leicester, University of London, Cambridge, and Oxford. And what do the students want? Let's hear it from Kendall Gardner, a Jewish student at Oxford University, speaking last week to a journalist for Al Jazeera News.
Demands broadly start with disclosure and divestment. As of right now, students do not have access to where their money is going when they pay tuition fees to this university. So crucially, our first demand is full disclosure of financial investments.
Crucially about Israel, right?
Well, we want to know where all of the money is going. We think that that's key for students to know where their money is going, whether it's about Israel or not. Mm-hmm. But then, with this knowledge, we would like to pursue full divestment from two things. First, from all arms manufacturing companies. Whether it's the current genocide in Gaza or other armed conflict around the world, our university should not be investing in that. This is a situation where we should be learning and contributing to education and a safe community, not to international conflict. And secondly, we request and demand that the university divest from all holdings in any entities that sponsor or are complicit in Israeli occupation, apartheid, and the current genocide in Gaza. Additionally, we have boycott demands, key of which is the demand to stop banking with Barclays, which the university currently does. Barclays has been complicit in the architecture of Israeli apartheid, and so that's a key demand from the boycott, divestment, and sanctions global movement. And our last demand is that the university commits to a Palestinian-led rebuilding of the Gazan higher education sector.
I wish I had a mouth that worked that well for words, was one of my favorite comments on the post where I found that clip. But what's really interesting, though, is in the past week, senior management at Trinity College in Dublin engaged with the student protesters, and they've now become the first university to begin divesting from UN blacklisted companies that are operating in Palestinian-occupied territories. This reminds me so much of the global movement to end apartheid in South Africa when I was a kid, a teenager, so this is the 80s, 90s. And I really remember the boycott from sports fixtures and culture right down to South African apples. And all of this was a really big force in bringing an end to apartheid rule there. To me, this is clear evidence that money is one big-ass lever to pull to make change happen. So, in keeping with the theme of money for positive change, a few weeks back, I hosted the Triodos annual meeting. So that's Triodos Bank UK, an ethical, sustainable bank, and the exclusive sponsors of If I Rule the World. They just won Best Ethical Financial Provider at the British Bank Awards for a third year in the row, which basically means they're really good at making sure your money doesn't go to funding all the shitty things that go on in the world. And I'm proud to have them as a sponsor. I'm also proud to be a customer. And I'm mentioning all that here because I hosted this meeting. It's something they do every year. And it's a chance for customers to have a direct line of communication with senior management who, on the day I managed to introduce as the bigwigs, which I was like, oh my God. But anyway, you know what? They can't fire me. I'm a customer, right? Sorry, guys, if you're listening. Anyway, it was a chance to speak to senior management for customers to be able to ask direct questions, but also a chance to hear about the amazing projects that Triodos support, from social justice, community projects, arts projects, environmental projects. You can watch the recording to find out more via the link in the show notes. We got talking after the event, and one of the bigwigs asked me about the podcast. Yes, they listen, and was asking me how I was getting on with it, and whether I started feeling like a bit of an expert on system change. Now, I'm not a fan of the word expert, but what I can say is that as I started joining the dots from guest 1 to guest 2 to guest 3 on the podcast, and so on, what has started to occur to me is one of the problems with this approach of using this podcast platform to focus on all the problems of the world and how we're going to change them is that we might start to feel a little bit overwhelmed, and we might not get a feel for when positive change is happening. So I figured today was going to be a good day to do a little stock-taking exercise and invite past guests to send in voice notes updating us on their work, on their campaigns, their thoughts, their mindsets, the wins, the gains, and the losses too. Jojo Mehta, co-founder and executive director of Stop Ecocide International. So this is the organization campaigning to make the mass destruction of ecosystems and habitats the fifth international crime, alongside the crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of aggression. Jojo was my very first guest on the podcast. We had never met, we had never spoken. So when I approached her, it was a totally cold call. And inviting her onto the podcast, and she said yes, for which I am eternally grateful, because do you know what? What a way to kick off a series about change making and positive system change, by basically having a guest who's not frigging around, but going right to the top and trying to change the rule book. So that is what Jojo set out to do, together with her colleague and friend, the late, great Polly Higgins. So we recorded episode 1, and then literally just a few days after we recorded, Jojo gets news that the European Union has agreed to strengthen its environmental crime directive to include the wording, cases comparable to ecocide. And she was ecstatic. It was a huge campaign win. But you know what? There's been even more positive change since then. So let's hear straight from Jojo.
It's been very exciting in the world of ecocide law. Firstly, there's been a consultation from the International Criminal Court's Office of the Prosecutor, and lots of eminent people have responded to it, saying that they think ecocide should be a fifth crime. There's also been the finalisation of the EU Environmental Crimes Directive, which includes the criminalisation of conduct that is comparable to ecocide. That means 27 countries are now going to have to harmonise with that law in the next couple of years. On the faith side of things, the Al-Mizan Charter was developed at the United Nations Environment Assembly in Nairobi, and that is setting out the Islamic perspective on protection of the environment, and that includes recommendation of ecocide law. On the business side, 6 CEOs of major businesses in Sweden, including a huge pensions organisation, SPP, have come out publicly to say they believe ecocide should be criminalised at the international level. And last but not least, or almost last, Belgium has also finally adopted a crime of ecocide into its new penal code. And it's the first national jurisdiction to treat the crime as an international level crime. Stay tuned and stay in tune, because the next big event is a cultural one, a massive choral concert in Helsinki, in the big Helsinki concert hall, from 1,000 singers performing specially written pieces around ecocide and ecocide law in a program that is available to all choirs all over the world, a program that can be accessed from our website. That's just a flavour of the highlights. There is so much going on. Sign up to our mailing list and stay in touch.
That's awesome. God, you know what? Hearing that, I'm like, it just strikes me at how many conversations are going on, and that despite what I would describe as a pretty negative kind of news ecosystem that at least I live in, I don't know about you guys, but yeah, that's amazing. I know there's lots of work to do, but I don't know. When I hear Jojo's voice, there's a kind of unstoppable ring to it. You know what I'm saying? My guest on episode 4 was Robbie Blackhole Miles. And I've been saying ever since to producer Sam, we need to get a lot more Robbie magic onto this podcast. So how do I explain who Robbie is? He is an ethnobotanist, a conservation scientist. He's the vice president of the Linnean Society of London, amongst many things. Robbie, though, more importantly to me anyway, he's one of those scientists that has not lost sight of, well, what we jointly called the magic of life. And literally one of my favorite moments on that episode was him reminding us of just how flipping amazing life is. I mean, like literally how amazing it is that plants capture energy from the sun and turn it into life and just make it all possible. We could have talked for hours talking plants and life and struggle and triumph and despair and hope and identity and culture and language and roots. It's all in episode 4 if you missed it. But let's hear from Robbie and how he's been getting on since we spoke.
Since I was on If I Ruled the World, something quite profound happened in my life. I lost my dad. I've realised I had had feelings of grief for nearly 40 years. They're linked to my faith and my belief that our home planet is a living entity. From being a little boy, I've carried a feeling of loss and helplessness regarding the planetary emergency that's unfolding around us. The grief I felt for my father as I watched him become increasingly unwell felt the same. My response was to do everything I could to make the world around me more resilient to that eventual loss. I felt the best thing I could do was to step up and support those that were feeling this loss most. It's something I've tried to do for the natural world. It's something that drives me. If grief comes in waves, then we're all being subjected to a continuous set of ripples. For some of us, those ripples are bigger than others. Some of us are feeling a tidal wave directly associated with the joint crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. Some of us may not even notice the gentle ripples affecting our lives. Ecological grief is something having a profound impact on people all over the world. For those losing their homes to drought or sea level rise, to those working like myself on the front line of nature conservation or environmental politics, it's something that not enough attention is being paid to. After the loss of my father, I've become aware of the variety of grief counselling services around us, yet access to help for ecological grief is so very limited. In my episode, I said I'd like to reconnect people with their place in the natural world, but perhaps, if I ruled the world, I'd also allow people to see what we stand to lose through our lack of connection. But it goes a heck of a lot further than that, because if we're going to reconnect people with the natural world and let them see that loss, then we need to have the support there to pick up the pieces when we realise it.
That's not what I was expecting at all. I have been in touch with Robbie a number of times and he hadn't told me that his dad had gone. Wow. Well, that is Robbie all over. I'm a little bit lost for words, actually, if I'm really honest, because I always say I was lucky that I got to about 40 years old before I really felt like real loss. So I've had a big chunk of my life either pretending that's not affecting me or it genuinely hasn't. But yeah, the last 10 years has been thick and fast. So it's a really tricky one because I'm definitely one of those people that would rather be busy and rather do anything else but talk about grief. But I'm really grateful to Robbie for his just his honesty. I think I've always had that feeling Robbie isn't, he just doesn't do small talk. Something else that came to mind though, listening to that, I think this is going to really resonate. We did get a really beautiful comment. I'm just looking for it now. He's called Campfire Sam on Instagram. And he is a traditional oral storyteller. And he wrote this, which, as I was listening to Robbie, I just thought, how do we create that space? And yes, there are services and counselors, but sometimes even that doesn't feel, I don't know, real enough. Anyway, Campfire Sam writes, give science its due, celebrate the power of abstraction, then reframe our view on it, balance it with hefty servings of intuition, story, and soul. Sam goes on to say, science is helpful, but we might have forgotten just how much of an abstraction from reality it is. I would hold spaces for people to hold big questions, grief, love, emotions beyond anger, aspirations beyond happiness. I would do my best to hold meaning as a marker for our highest potential. I already am in small ways with the help of old stories and wisdom filtered by their countless retellings. But then Sans signs off saying, but I certainly don't want to rule. From the very first time I heard Eddie speak, I knew I wanted to get him on this podcast. Eddie Muchibi is a Ugandan farmer, agronomist, and in his capacity as a food justice campaigner, he's the president of Slow Food International. What struck me about Eddie was his capacity to stand up and be the leader in a David and Goliath-style battle between the world's smallholder farmers and the juggernaut that is the globalist industrial food system. So we talked about this, and we talked on more things in episode 5, and he did this all from his family farm in Mukono district, which is close to the shores of Lake Victoria, and from that rich, fertile, verdant pocket of land in Uganda. Eddie just emanated this incredible energy and intensity, this mental and emotional bandwidth to see the bigger picture, to campaign for positive change for his family, his community, for his country, for Africa, for the world. So let's hear from Eddie with his update.
I've been moving up and down in the mountains and also traveling all over in the field because it's a rain season that has come late. And as a farmer, I really want to see what my other fellow farmers are doing and how they are coping up with the unexpected changes in climate. The rains in most of the parts of Uganda have come late. There has been an extended drought, and this is becoming true for the entire Eastern African region, but also in other parts of the African continent. This is concerning the climate crisis that is already a global issue, and that is a big concern to all of us. It is turning into an emergency, especially to the farmers, to the communities and pastoral communities in the tropics or in the global south. And we at the grassroots, we are at the ground. We see it because it disorganizes our planting activities. It makes us suffer seeing our animals grazing on bare land without pasture because of the prolonged droughts. We see the escalation of pests and diseases, new pests, but also proliferation of pests in terms of numbers, which is making lives of millions of farmers difficult to live. So apart from the climate crisis, one thing that is happening right now is the escalation in global hunger. We will specifically point out hunger in the conflict zones or in the conflict areas of the world. This is a very big challenge that we have to think about right now and call the international community to act upon. We see hunger taking its course in Sudan, where the conflict does not allow humanitarian delivery of food, it does not allow producers to grow food. The conflict is having a lot of socio-economic implications that people cannot even work to buy food and put food on the plate for their families. Many farmers have abandoned the fields. Many herdsmen and herdswomen have abandoned the animals. The animals have been killed. The animals have been abandoned, and no one is taking care of these productive activities because of the conflict. But again, one thing that hurts most is that to some of the creators of these conflicts, hunger is a very big weapon of war to them, which is also against humanity. It's against the principle of people living in a free environment where they can access basic needs like food, shelter, and water. So this is a criminal activity of using food and hunger as a weapon of war. We also see this coming up so strongly in Gaza. In Gaza, where a lot of people have been denied access to food, have been denied access to water, they have been denied access to proper nutrition, proper medication. A lot of people who tried to voluntarily prepare and deliver food to hungry communities in the Gaza region, they actually been blocked, and many of them have suffered the violent implications of this conflict because they are just trying to do the right thing and give people food to survive and live and see the other day. But again, many opportunists who are taking advantage of this war, they are trying so much to block people from accessing food, using hunger as a silver bullet that they want to employ to fight their war. This is criminal. It's not the right thing to do. Of course, we condemn the terrorist activities that happened last year that caused all this violent conflict that has become a conflict of global concern. But again, we also condemn the action of denying people who are victims of war to basic needs, to basic services, to food, to health care, and also to water. This is something that is happening not only in Sudan, not only in Gaza, but also in other places like here near where I am in Congo. A lot of people, because of the continued fighting, they cannot access food, they cannot grow their own food. It's also happening in the Chad, in the Central African Republic, in many conflict zones. So it's important that as an international community that is concerned with all people's access to good, clean, and fair food, we come up and work against this inhumane suffering of people.
And all that while he's trying to grow food. Fucking hell, man. It's meant to be a happy, optimistic, let's keep going podcast. But like, maybe this is a reality. Like, we can't like pretend everything. I mean, he said everything I want to say, right? And I hope that for people listening to this, I hope that like this makes us feel like we're all kind of share the same concerns, that we're all, we're not that different. We all want to be able to look after people we love. We want to have purpose, a sense of purpose to our lives. We want to feel safe. We want to thrive. We want to eat well. And I hope hearing Eddie's message, someone whose kind of day job is looking after his family farm, growing food, making a living. And if there are any farmers out there listening to this, you'll know that's not easy. That, I had no idea what he was going to send through with his update, with his voice message. He's made no mention of his campaigning, of his advocacy. He's really just concerned about these bigger picture things. And for me, actually, the other really important thing is getting that perspective on stories that are not popping up on the radar here in the UK, maybe in other countries. So what's going on in Sudan, what's going on in Congo, the Congo Basin, DRC, Chad. There are many conflict zones that aren't really getting the headlines, getting the coverage. So yeah, it's really good to hear a literal boots, gumboots probably on the ground assessment of how things are looking out there. If you've been listening for a while to this podcast, you'll know by now I'm really proud to have Triodos Bank UK as the exclusive sponsors of If I Ruled the World. You can check out their newsletter, Colour of Money, where they spotlight the many ways that they use money for positive change. Unlike other banks where customers have absolutely no idea where their money is going, whether it's arms companies or extractive, exploitative, polluting operations, Triodos Bank is totally transparent. They publish details of every organization they finance on their website, so customers can see exactly how their money is delivering positive change for people and planet. But here's the kicker. Triodos can't do this on its own. They hope that one day all banks will behave like this, because for Triodos, this is all about system change, one bank at a time. So there's something that's definitely, it's a little bit comedy in a dark comedy kind of way, which is, obviously I'm listening to all of these voice notes for the first time. Producer Sam has done an amazing job at collating everything and rounding up all these messages from our guests who've already appeared on the podcast. And we kind of had this idea that we were going to have a solo episode where, yes, we get to kind of update listeners with where, all our guests are with their work. It started well with Jojo. But it's a little bit comedy because I keep introducing everyone. It's like, what great news are they bringing? And they're like, you know what, Gillian, we're all grown-ups. We're going to deal with this. And we're going to have some real talk. And I think that's maybe what this is about. It's a real talk episode. We're going to jump ahead now to episode 10 with our guest, Mike Webb from the Gwent Wildlife Trust in South Wales. When I got in touch with Mike, it wasn't actually for the podcast. It was because I was writing an opinion piece about solar farms. And I was asking around for anyone who was monitoring their impact on biodiversity and wildlife, good and bad. And basically, all roads led to Mike. So he's got a really interesting background. He's an ecologist, but has worked for most of his life through the planning system under various guises, is now at Gwent Wildlife Trust as their planning manager and conservation officer, and is leading a campaign to protect the Gwent levels. An estuarine landscape, an iconic landscape, and I'm reading verbatim now, a landscape of international significance reclaimed from the sea in Roman times, crisscrossed with a network of fertile hills and historic watercourses, and covered, now this is me now, covered with sites of special scientific interest, so-called SSSIs. So when I caught up with Mike, he was in full swing with a campaign to stop mega solar farm developments in the Gwent levels. And yeah, we gave a shout out to the campaign on the website. So I figured, you know what, why don't we catch up with him and find out how they're getting on.
Yeah, it's done really well, actually. Lots of stuff happening here. And a lot of it thanks to you. So just a quick update on where we are with all the stuff that we chatted about a month or so ago. Yeah, our petition to stop major development on the Gwent levels SSSI reached an amazing 5,500 signatures to the Welsh Parliament. At one stage, it was the fastest growing petition in Wales, and there wasn't a single Welsh Parliament constituency throughout Wales that didn't have people signing it. So that was really, really exciting. The petition was heard at a committee of the Welsh Parliament, the Senedd, and good result for us, Gillian. The committee decided that they would contact the minister, the planning minister, and get her to do something definitive, if possible, to call a halt on major development on the SSSI. In support of the petition, we organised a demonstration on the steps of our Welsh Parliament. We were expecting sort of 30 to 40 people. but over 100 people turned up. It was a really inspiring occasion, Gillian. There were drums, there was chanting, there were banners, there were young and old, people born on the levels, people farming the levels, small business people on the levels, environmentalists from all over, including a parish councillor dressed as one of our rare bee species, the shrill-carder bee. So that was quite good. And we've also launched a crowdfunder now to pay for legal representation to fight two of the big damaging projects that are coming up on the Gwent levels over the summer. So, I would urge everybody to contribute to that as much or as little as you feel you can do. So that's been launched and that'll be available for people to contribute to. We've also launched an open letter. That's the next stage in our campaign. So the open letter is going to go to the Welsh Parliament, the Senedd, and it'll go to the Minister and all the politicians. And what that will do is that will get the politicians to sign the open letter calling for a halt on development on the Gwent levels SSSI. We're hoping that politicians from all political parties are going to sign that letter and that, once and for all, Gillian, we're going to be able to put our hand on our hearts and say, we brought about a halt in damaging developments in the SSSI. Diolch o galon, Gillian, am dy holl help gyda'r gwaith yma. Mae'r ymgyrch wedi bod yn un andros o dda. Heblaw amdano chi, fasa wedi bod mor cymaint anoddach a cymaint hirach. Felly, heroes i chi, Gillian. And that means thank you, Gillian, from our hearts for all your help with this campaign. This journey that we've been on, would have been so much longer and harder without you. So long live Gillian.
Long live Gillian. 100%. I'm taking that. Oh, wow. If I rule the world, I never thought it would be that soon before people would be singing songs of praise. Thank you, Mike. Oh my gosh, for the update. I'm humbled that Mike feels that I played a role in that. I think it was just a question of good timing, really. I just happened to be on a train rolling past a solar farm, not a mega solar farm array, actually, just a small development. And I do look at these every time I go past, and I'm always a bit curious about this kind of conflict that I feel, which is, well, internal conflict, I should say, that I feel, which is between deploying technology that is there to make the world a better place, for want of a better expression, but asking, as a scientist, are there any negative impacts and should we be monitoring that? And should we be brave enough to ask the question in order to be able to address it properly? And, this isn't about sort of banning solar farms or any of that. It's just, in my view, my humble opinion, it's just good science. Episode 9 featured Foxglove, the digital justice legal team pioneering digital activists taking on big tech. And this episode, oh my God, had so many comments, mostly from folks going, what the fuck, I had no idea. So yeah, episode 9 was an eye-opener on the very, how do I put it, very dodgy, in some cases illegal and exploitative practices of big tech companies around the world. Now, in many cases, these companies are household names. These are the companies behind the social media platforms that we use and are very familiar with, but also some of the automation of civic society that most of us are not aware of. Anyway, Martha Dark and Rosa Curling, two of the founding members, came on the show and walked us through these really shady practices. And these kick-ass women are taking on, along with the rest of the team at Foxglove, some of the biggest companies in the world. So they didn't have time to send a voice note, but they did send an email newsletter because they are less than a week away from a really pivotal case that they're fighting They're fighting Meta's unfair dismissal of its Facebook content moderators. Now, these content moderators are like the frontline workers, the safety workers of all our social media platforms. So I'm going to read a little bit of a newsletter that just came in to give you a sense of where things are at and where they're heading. It goes, Dear Gillian, next Monday, the 20th of May, there's a crunch legal hearing for the Facebook content moderators fighting for justice in Kenya. There is so much at stake. We're supporting the moderators to take on one of the biggest, richest, most powerful companies in the world. And if we win, it will send ripples across the globe, so I wanted to share an update in advance. This work started for us back in 2022 when we started supporting Daniel Motau, a whistleblower who was sacked from the Content Moderation Office after raising concerns about working conditions and trying to start a union. In January 2023, we then also started supporting 184 other former workers from the same office. They were all unfairly sacked in a sham mass redundancy process. Rather than address the concerns being raised by workers, low pay, dangerous working conditions, Facebook opted for union busting. It switched outsourcing suppliers and then blacklisted its former employees to stop them getting their jobs back. In both legal cases, Facebook has been resisting accountability. It's been trying to argue it shouldn't be challenged in Kenyan courts, as it's not a Kenyan business. This is despite having a major office there, as well as millions of Kenyan users. Perhaps most shockingly, it's been refusing to pay the workers whilst the case is ongoing, despite a Kenyan judge ordering it to do so. Facebook knows exactly what it's doing here. It's making the sacked workers destitute. They're struggling to afford to feed their families or pay their rent. Some are now homeless. Alongside our legal partner in Kenya, Mercy Mutemi, we've been helping the moderators prepare the next steps by consulting various experts, obtaining evidence, and building the strongest possible case. If next week the Court of Appeal upholds the earlier rulings in our favour, then that's a big win for us and the case can proceed to the next stage. If, on the other hand, the Court of Appeal reverses the earlier decision, then that's going to be a big setback. Either way, we'll be supporting the moderators in their fight for justice, and I'll keep you updated on how it's going. Of course, Facebook is fighting this tooth and nail at every stage. I wouldn't be surprised if part of Facebook's strategy is hoping we run out of energy or money and that the moderators are forced to give up and back down. But we're not going to give up. We're able to stick with this case and keep supporting the moderators in their fight thanks to donations and encouragement from Foxglove supporters. I'll let you know how the court hearing goes. Martha. If you want to find out more about Foxglove's work or the work of any of our guests on this podcast, always head to the show notes. We always provide links to their campaigns, to the organizations, and how you can support their work. Last but by no means least is an update from the youth charity Action for Conservation, AFC for short, who we featured in episode 6, and I got to speak to, and I love saying their names, Hendrikus van Hensbergen and Hannibal Rhodes, Driki and Hal for short, who are the duo at the helm of AFC, and they run youth campaign groups, they run youth summer programs to mentor the next generation of conservationists and activists. And although their work is youth-focused, the balm is intergenerational work, intergenerational healing of heads, hearts, and the land. And they take this intergeneration, I know I'm saying that word a lot, but it is really the crux of what they do. They take this intergenerational knowledge of nature, of culture, and the Welsh language, and they work to build a knowledge map, an ecological knowledge map of this area that they have use of, Penpont Estate in Wales. It's beautiful work, and if you haven't listened to episode 6, please do, because Hal and Driki are wonderful speakers, and Hal particularly is such a deep thinker. And something in that conversation as well really changed in me, really challenged me to start finding my voice or using my voice more, for which I'm really grateful to both of them. But Hal sent in the update, so let's hear from Hal.
Since we last spoke and appeared on your podcast, we've been sort of preempting the popping up of flowers this spring by doing a large-scale tree planting campaign on the land at Penpont. The aim isn't to sort of carpet the whole place with trees, but to put them in specific places and to get a diversity of trees there so that they can act as a seed source for natural regeneration. And in our February visit with the young people who co-design all of these restoration actions with us, we also planted a new orchard, a circular orchard around an oak tree or a sapling of oak tree in a field called Kaidoan, which means oak field. So the work to restore the land and to do so in a way that relates to the old names of these places and brings together the young people, farmers, the landowners, and also the elders who live on the site is continuing. And we're finding hope in that, even as flowers turn up a bit too early in the spring and we can feel the mildness, the unseasonable mildness that's come all through the winter. I think the words of poet Wendell Berry always come to mind, which is laughter is immeasurable. Be joyful though you've considered all the facts, because we're just continuing to do what we think is right and the good work, even though there are troubling signs all around. So I hope you and your listeners and all of the other people who've been contributing to the podcast since are managing to do that as well. And thank you again for having us on the programme.
Hal, you brought it home. Thank you. Oh man, laughter. Be joyful, even if you've considered all the facts. What more can I say? That episode was a real turning point for me in my personal journey on this podcast, because I really felt like I had permission to feel like I belonged. I really felt like I had permission to speak what's on my heart, to find my voice. And that's still a work in progress. I'm still not where I would like to be. But yeah, for all those things, I just have to say massive thank you to Hal and Driki. Oh, this journey. This journey so far, and it hasn't taken long, it's only episode 16 of the podcast, is making me realize that I feel like I've been stuck in a painting, like in an oil painting, for most of my life. And I am slowly starting to peel at least a little part of me off this canvas to be able to look back and get a glimpse of the bigger picture. And yeah, there is still plenty of unsticking to do. But what I can absolutely feel, and I hope you can feel it too, it's that through these conversations, there's this feeling of connection, feeling connected to a vast collective will to change the world for the better. All the episodes are up on Spotify, on Apple, wherever you listen to the podcasts. And yeah, go back and dip into episodes you haven't listened to before, re-listen to some, because they're gems in all of them. And also, do you know what? I'm really excited about this. We have started to switch up a few details of the podcast you might have noticed. So we've switched up the titles. We're really starting to frame the conversation around this central question of, if I rule the world, what would I do? If you rule the world, what would you do? And it's not because we're all power-grabbing megalomaniacs, but because we've been playing around with this format in the interviews themselves and really challenging guests to play with this idea of being a benign dictator, tapping into that collective will for a better world, and having the power to make it so. And it's actually started to produce some really interesting answers and really interesting ideas, some real blue sky thinking, surprising ideas, gonna blow your mind. So yeah, hit the follow button on Spotify or on Apple or wherever you listen to get notified when these new episodes do drop. A massive thank you to all the guests, Jojo, Robbie, Eddie, Mike, and Hal, who took time out of their days, and I know they're busy, to give us an update on their work and on their lives, their thoughts, and what's on their hearts as well. And let me know what's going on with you. I'm really loving all the comments, all the emails. I'm actually really honored that you guys take the time to share really thoughtful, really heartfelt ideas and suggestions and stories. So please keep them coming, either on Instagram. My handles on Instagram is Gillian's_voice, or you can email me at podcast@gillianburkevoice.com or use the Spotify Q&A function. And honestly, more than any of that, please share this episode, even with just one person, because it is all about connection. connecting the dots, joining the dots, feeling that collective will, our collective will for a better world. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. Change might be an act of faith, but a product of conviction. So on that note, take a moment and take a breath and pause. And in that stillness, see if you can sense the winds of change. Thanks for listening.